This is lesson 9.1 in pre-algebra. There are 4 sections to chapter 9, so we'll get started with paired data and graphing ordered pairs. So in chapter 1 we already did some things with data, and I've got 2 figures here. One is called a scatter diagram, which is this one right here, and one is called a line graph right here. Now what we've got here that I want to focus on is the dependency or the paired data that is going on in this graph. Notice that after time in seconds, 1 second, the speed in miles per hour of this particular object is somewhere between 50 and 100. So there's some data here that we've got that time and speed are going to give me 2 different numbers. One is my time, and my speed is going to be, looks like about 75. As I go up here to 4 seconds, my speed is going to be up here close to 200. So this data is paired. The 4 pairs with the almost 200, the 1 pairs with the 75-ish. So as we look at time in seconds, we have a speed that's related to it. Now we don't know what's going on between here. So what happens at 3.5 seconds? We're not sure, and that's where the line graph comes in, as we can go to 3.5 seconds and go up, and because we connected these dots here, we can guess that somewhere between, at 3.5 seconds, we're somewhere between 150 and 200 miles an hour. It doesn't dip down or do anything else. So that's the reason for the line graph, is it kind of gives us an idea of what the speed would be based on some in-between numbers in between the dots. So really this little part of the section is just to get you familiar with paired values, so that if we have a number along here, there's a relationship between the number along here. Alright? Which brings us to something you're probably familiar with. It might have been a while since you've had it, but there's something called the rectangular coordinate system. It's also called the Cartesian plane, and I usually just call it the XY axis. And so any of those 3 would work as far as your description, but I will call it the XY axis just because it flows off my tongue easier. And it looks like this. So when we're doing the XY axis, we have some vocabulary I want to look at. One is the origin, that point right there where we are doing nothing. We're not moving anywhere in here. That's our starting point. In fact, that's a 0 right there. So we go to 1, 2, 3, 4. To the right, positive. To the left, negative. So obviously this point right here would be 0. Up is always positive. Down is always negative. This is called the x-axis. So if we're moving, say, 5 units along the x-axis, we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This being the y-axis. If we're moving 4 up on the y-axis, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. If we're moving 4 down, we're going in a negative direction, 1, 2, 3, 4. Quadrants, there's 4 of them, obviously. The first quadrant is here, and then it goes counterclockwise around this way. So be familiar with that as you get into some upper level math. If you decide to take trigonometry, you will need to know those quadrants inside and out. So just remember 1, 2, 3, 4, and that will really help you. So when we are placing a point somewhere on this graph, we can, I'll do that with black ink here. If I have a point, let's say I put it right here, and somebody wants to know where that point is. Well, in order to get to that point, we started it at the origin, and we went over on the x-axis 4, and then we went up on the y-axis 1. So we went over 4, let's do black. We went over 4 and up 1. And then we put it in parentheses. That is the way that you label any point on the XY axis. The first point, the 4, will always be X, and the second point will always be Y. So it's always labeled X first, and then the Y. And you can label any point in the whole history of the universe on this graph using that X, Y. So over, left or right, X, up or down, Y. So if I wanted to label this point right there, I came over -4 and I went down 2. So I went over this way and then I went down this way. So let's say I wanted to label this point right here. I went over 4 and I went down -5. And if I had a point like right here, I went over -4, that's the direction I went, and then I went up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's how we label certain points. Now, that is, if I give you points on there, are you able to tell me their location using what we just did? And that's what example 2 looks at. There are going to be some times where they are going to give you numbers and ask you to place those points on the graph. Okay, so let's start here from scratch here. So let's say I ask you to graph 3, 2. That means that I'm going to go over 3 and go up 2, and then I can put my point there. If I ask you to do -3, 2, I'm going to go over -3 and up 2, and I'm going to have that point there. So there'll be some times where they give you the points and you have to graph the point. There'll be other times where they give you the graph and ask you to label those points. And that's pretty much all there is to the lecture 9.1. But before I close this out, we haven't really dealt with what do we do about zeros. So let's say that I have a point 4, 0. And we'll do this in red so you can see a little bit better what's going on. So that's the point that they're looking for. Well, this is my x, so I'm going to go over 4. And this says 0. That means I go up or down, nothing. I stay where I'm at. There's no up or down. So my point 4, 0 is right there on the x-axis. Now, it may be that they ask me what 0, 4 is to place that on the graph. Well, I start here, and it says go left or right 0. So I don't go any left or right. It just says go up 4. So I go up 4, and there's the point that I'm looking for. That is point 0, 4, and it's on the y-axis. So when you've got zeros in there, sometimes that can be a little bit confusing. And the problem set in 9.1 is pretty self-explanatory. It's graphing some points and putting some coordinates on, that kind of thing. For 1 through 18, if you just want to make one big graph and just graph all those points on the one graph and just label, so like if this is number 2, you just put a 2 here, and if this is 3, number 4, so that you can just label which number point you're, or which number of ordered pair you're putting on the graph. That would be great, rather than doing a graph for each one. And you can also do the same thing for any of the other ones that you're following. If they're asking you to do that, it doesn't really look like they're doing it. It looks like mostly they're just asking yes or no questions for a lot of it, so it shouldn't give you too much of a struggle there. So anyway, that's it for 9.1.